Okay, so the recording started. I want to thank Ilya for delivering this meetup. By the end of the meetup, I will send you through the meetup platform the link for the slides and the video. And I will also send you some more stuff, free stuff you can enjoy. And let's start. So Ilya, the stage is yours, please.
Okay, so hello everybody. I'm glad that we are all here. Yeah. Oh, I have this background. Okay. Hey. Okay. Um, so let's start then, I guess. Okay, we will be talking today about next generation shell. Um, so, and the first question would be, which problem it actually solves. And it solves this absurd situation in which DevOps is actually devs and devs got all the languages, and ops got Bash. And um, so basically, ops people, or what's called DevOps or whatever, systems engineers, um, they don't have a good programming language. On one side, we have Bash, which was created in different era for different problems. And it doesn't meet, let's say, today's expectations from programming language. On the other hand, we have Python, Ruby, Go, whatever, which are general purpose languages, which are being a bit abused to do DevOps. Yeah, and so Bash is also abused because it's, if you want, structured data, which you have all over today, you're using JQ typically. And I don't find it convenient. So it's, and that's the point where I thought, I have Bash, I have Python, and none of this is feeling actually convenient to do what I'm trying to do. And what I'm trying to do, what is actually Devops scripting? What do we mean by that? So if these operations here are frequent in your script, that would be considered Devops scripting from my perspective. And that's where next generation shell, sorry, I have this here. Yeah, okay. And that's what NGS is about. So um, let's see how the things should be. And things should be like that. That's if you use NGS, okay? Why I think I'm in the position to help anyone. I'm doing DevOps for quite a while. I've seen stuff because I was freelancer, so I was all over different companies, startups, mostly startups. And in 2013, I decided, okay, enough of that. There is no good solution, which is a programming language for DevOps. Let's do it. And since NGS is working for us in BIMI, I hope that it can work for other people too. So I would, today I will give a bunch of examples, but I think that a short introduction to the basics of the language is kind of in place to get some basis for the examples. Okay, so language design principles, that's what's at the base of the language. So I want the language to be relatively small in number of concepts that it has. If you're doing DevOps scripting, that whatever you're doing should be in standard library or directly in the syntax of the language, depending on the frequency of how much you use the feature. So for example, running external program would be a syntax. That's number 3 here. Additional rule is that small scripts do not pay. And that means that if you have like a script that should be 2 lines, it will not be a public static void main and the class around it, because the language is all about objects or whatever. And another aspect of that is error handling, which is exceptions and not something which is returned and you need to check it every time. So because many of the scripts in DevOps, it's fine if they just fail. and you don't want them to be like twice as long just because you're handling every error. Consistency, well, that's pretty hard one because it needs many eyeballs, because you don't always see that something is inconsistent because you're so much in some particular view of the language or whatever you're doing now. So that would be nice to have help. Just open issues for if something is inconsistent. So what are the big concepts in the language? Types. We will go over all of this in a bit more detail a bit later, but overview of the big concepts. Types, methods, multiple dispatch, which is somewhat tailored for the language, exceptions, and patterns. What is notably missing, I think, is classes. So if you take a language which has classes and you compare it to NGS, if you take types and methods in NGS, that will be roughly equal to classes in other languages. Two syntaxes, because, well, I wanted a programming language, but I also wanted to have like concise way to run external programs. So one of the syntaxes, the number one, looks like, typical real programming language. And the second one looks like pretty much subset of Bash, I would say. So types, how you declare type, you just type and the name. That's how you declare type. I was surprised by myself how far you could actually get without declaring the fields. And well, until this day, NGS doesn't have fields declaration on types, and it's still somehow fine. So if a type needs to inherit, that's the second line. That's type, child, and then parent, which is, I think, quite obvious. How you create an instance, that's C equals child, roughly like Python. Then you can assign to any field, because fields are not declared. You're free to assign to whatever field. So the multi-methods and methods. So on this slide, you see two methods defined. And since they have the same name, they form a multi-method. And when you call kind of both of them, and NGS decides which one runs. So as opposed to many different languages, the search is not by which type fits the most perfectly, which parameters fit the most perfectly. The search is bottom up, and wherever arguments match the parameters, the method is invoked. What's interesting is that the method also can have guard. That's for fine-grained control. And this guard, if the expression in the guard returns false, that tells the language, you know what, that was not the correct method to invoke. Please keep searching up. So if you call wake up on Mondays, we will see oof. Not on Mondays, we will see okay. So what is also interesting, what happened, okay, now let's say you have types and they inherit from each other. How is that related to the order of methods? Well, usually if you inherit from a type, like here, that means that at the point that you declare the child type, the parent is already loaded and probably all its methods are already loaded. So the order is fine in many cases. So how you call the methods in multi-methods? Well, that's pretty much regular stuff that you see in other languages. What's interesting is that uniform function call syntax, it's not unique to NGS. It's a feature where you can just take the first parameter and take it out and place it before the function and the dot between them. And that's how you can move the C out of the parentheses on the left side and put them in front of the operation. It's just pretty convenient thing. Exceptions. Well, it just has exceptions. It doesn't well, it also has a result type, but it's something different. It mostly works with exceptions. what you see here in the wake up function throws error. That's actually how language design manifests. So in other languages, it would be if C is sick, then throw error. But since I have seen that this pattern is so common that you have a if, then condition, then throws, then throw, and then something, that this became a shorter syntax. So you have throws. You have condition, then throws, and then whatever you throw. Also, it works with return, and which becomes returns and breaks and continues. So you have shortcuts for this. And the catch is pretty much ordinary, as you would expect in like many other languages. You catch. You can also specify the type of the exceptions that you are trying to catch. And if you want like really fine-grained control, catches also support guards. So that means that I have example later. It's less important right now. Okay, so let's get to the fun stuff. Use cases. Um, so what do we do in NGS? We run external programs, we manipulate data, we do things in parallel, we work with files. And also, not the least important is NGS should be used as one of the command line tools in your pipe when using other shells, for example, Bash or whatever. And these are kind of the intended use cases for NGS. So, and we don't have to actually dive into every one of them, but I want you to feel that you're covered. If you're using NGS and you're doing things like this, you are covered. If you're not covered, that's a bug. And you can open an issue on GitHub. If there's something DevOpsy that you're doing and it's not supported or it's not convenient to do in NGS, that's a bug. Okay, which is actually very different from, let's say, Python. If you go to, let's say, I just imagine today, you go to Python community and say, you know what, running external programs is not very convenient in Python. Maybe, what do you think? Maybe we'll have a syntax for that? Probably not. Maybe we can have maybe exit codes handling, which should throw exceptions. And no, you just use the library. It will be second level citizen. Anyhow. So if you're running external programs, NGS got you covered in these aspects. Let's just go just one by one, not very deep, but quick. Okay, first of all, sometimes you need to check that the program is installed on the computer. That's how you do it. If program, blah, blah, blah. Actually, I can show how that feels. N. By the way, N is alias, which is I'm just frequently using. That's NGS PI, print inspect. Okay, and let's say program ls. Okay, program with name ls. Okay, so in Boolean context, that will check if it's installed. Okay, this one is installed. How about this one? Not. Okay, so that's how this if works. Assert that program is installed. So sometimes you have scripts which require some programs to be installed, and they cannot work without this program. So just put assert in front, in front, at the top of the script, typically. Yeah. So if we have, yeah, you probably guys remember that we can also place assert after this. If you do the dot assert, nope, exception, because the assert failed. Okay, that's okay. That's less interesting, but sometimes it's useful. And just as well facility to create command line arguments when you are preparing to call external program, because sometimes you have nulls, sometimes you have whatnot, and it's becoming tedious to prepare these command line arguments for the next program. So there's facility for that. I'm not diving into that. Comparing to Bash, NGS behaves like many alternative shells today. If you have a variable and you use it with $var name or whatever, it will not expand to multiple places. This madness is gone. Okay, if you want multiple places, that's $star. and you know syntactically that it will expand to several arguments, actually 0 or more. Okay, this is not very interesting. Okay, signals, mildly interesting, I would say. Let's say you run a web server, you do some tests on it, and then you need to kill it. That's how it would look like in NGS. This is actually very similar to code that we had in Vimy. We had command line tools, and that's one of the tools was actually starting web server. So we need to check whether it was working correctly. That's roughly how it looked like. Okay, getting the output of the external programs that you're running. Notable differences. The first line looks like roughly like Bash when you capture the output. Bash by default, actually not by default, I think it does it every time, strips the new line at the end of the output. And that's the information that you lose and you cannot ever recover. Okay, and NGS does not do that. You will have the new line at the end of the output. For the utilities which return something useful as one line of output, you should use the line option. Oops, the line option. It will give you the first line without the end of line character. If you want all lines, just do dot lines. And in the second part of the slide, you'll see that if you run a program and you waited for it to finish, you will have the standard output in this field. And then that works unless you did some redirection or whatnot, which is also supported by syntax, but we are not looking into that. Okay, I think this is a notable feature of NGS because it shows like several aspects of the design, and it's also pretty frequent. So this double backtick syntax that you see here, it runs external program and parses the output. So let's say if you have an API which returns JSON, that's exactly how you would work with it. Let's say you have like monitoring or whatever. Maybe we can actually run something like that. Actually, you know what? My IP, I think my IP function. I'm looking at standard library of NGS, by the way. My IP. Okay, no, it does fetch for some reason. But it would also work with backticks. Let's see that. Curl. This is an API which returns JSON. So let's first of all print all of it. Okay, it has IP, a country, and country code. Let's say we want the country code just for the kicks of it. Okay, string. Okay. So that's how it works. It runs the command. I think -s would be do silent, right? Yeah, without this bullshit. By the way, you get this verbose output because it's print and spec. If you want just the IL part, you just use print. If for some reason you want to make a JSON out of it, this will be valid JSON output. Okay, anyhow, we'll get there. So what else is it? This, as many, this syntax, it's actually calling several methods while it's doing its job. And that's how this syntax is customizable, and you can parse whatever you want as long as you define how to parse it. So here, for example, you see a definition for find. Find will parse the output into array of strings. I don't want to dive into this either, but you just need to know that you can customize, and if you have your own commands which output in your own format, whatever that is, you can customize that. Okay, another thing which is I think differentiates NGS from sorry, the font is not readable in here in the shell. Oh, come on. That's laggy. Yeah. Okay. because nobody apparently seems to actually care about exit codes, and just does. Okay, so let's compare this example with, let's say, bash. Okay, we have grep here, we have then and else. So what's interesting is that grep actually has three exit codes: 0 for true, 1 for false, and 2 for an error. And if you're using bash or pretty much not anything else, but many other things, they will not get into this details about what is exception and what's not. And NGS will get into this detail. So this if goes actually in NGS goes three ways. It's either then, else, or exception. Because for example, if you like misname the file here, and grep will return 2. And if you say you're in bash, you will see the error, maybe, if you're lucky, but generally it will continue the execution into the else clause. Not so in NGS. Anyhow, let's say you have your Snowflake program and it's actually okay for that program to return 10, exit code 10, and it's not an exception. Well, in NGS, you have a syntax and you can specify what are the non-exception exit codes. And that could be just a single integer or array of integers or a range. I think that the array also supports ranges inside. I'm not sure, but it's pretty flexible. And if it's not flexible enough, you can customize more by defining an additional method, which is called finished OK. There's finished OK. Maybe I should rename it, but anyhow, there is several of them defined. You can override that. Let's say you have a special program which you need to test, the state of the universe before you check. You can tell what exit code means. You can override this method. Not override, but actually, well, kind of override. It's close to overriding. Add additional method to the multi-method. Okay, so here's how you handle exceptions. Exit codes to exceptions. Okay, signals, not very interesting. You also have control over signals, how to treat them. Okay, let's get into the more interesting part. Data manipulation, which is actually under development still in NGS, but I think it's pretty interesting already. So the main topic is the universal pattern matching. So you can think about this as you take regular expressions and you generalize it. Generalize to data structures such as arrays and hashes. Um, and you try all of it to be kind of the same mindset, that you just have a pattern, you have your data, and you check whether the data matches the pattern. By the way, after I called this universal pattern matching, I thought maybe it's not generic enough because it's universal pattern something, because you actually might be creating new data structure from old one. So it would be like transformation and not exactly matching, because you will be like using the data that was matched in order to create something new. So let's take a look at a couple of examples here. Let's say we want to filter a list. And this list is a bunch of objects and they have the field n. So here's NGS versus Python. Actually, it's very interesting because I went to Stack Overflow even though I knew answers, because I thought, okay, maybe people will figure out something more interesting, more concise. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't, but it was a very interesting experience. And that's why also it take a lot of time to prepare this presentation, because I was, oh, and how they do this? I maybe I know, but maybe there's a better way. So, and how they do this in JQ? How about Ruby, stuff like that. Anyhow, so that's why it took so much time to prepare this presentation. So we have filter, which will return the subset of the list. Just a second. And any would just check if there is any matching element in the list. So this slide is not very precise because on the Python side, if the field n is not present on that object, that will be an exception. And on the left side, it will not be. It just means that the pattern will not match. So if you don't do discounts in Python, that's how things would compare actually. So I think that whatever we have in JS in this case is more readable. And on Python, on the other hand, is more verbose. I personally actually never connected with this list comprehension syntax. Somehow it is not aligned with how I think. I don't know. Some people say it's completely fine. I think it's maybe people with more mathematical background. I don't know. Anyhow, Ruby is more close to how NGS works. But this select, by the way, select method has several names in Ruby. Anyhow, the select method, which is kind of filter, it takes a piece of code to the right, which it runs. It doesn't take a pattern exactly. By the way, so patterns in NGS are actually superset of predicates. If you pass here in the blue, if you pass a function, that means this function will check each element. So this function will be called with each element. And depending on what that function returns, the element stays or goes. It's like in Ruby or in many different languages, in which filter method takes a predicate. Okay, what else we have? Okay, assorted examples with different stuff that we can check. So my list matches the pattern repeat. Repeat, that means that from 0 to unlimited number of repetitions. In this particular case, you can specify number of repetitions. So this one checks that each object in the array has the field number of chickens, and that field is of type integer. I guess it somehow reflect realities, unless somebody is sick and then you can count half chicken. I don't know. Anyhow, um, the second one checks finds the first item which has state running and throws exception if it's not found. The next one is almost the same. It finds the first element which matches the pattern, but it could we call the filter example as some sort of destructure syntax. It's not destructure. You cannot. For now, the universal pattern match doesn't have destructuring feature in it, so it doesn't work like that yet. It is planned feature, and I'm just not sure how to do it right yet. I had several thoughts about that, but nothing conclusive yet. Okay, so let's continue. So for the first here with host localhost, that's the default. So if element with this pattern is not found, this object is returned to the right. Reject is the reverse of filter. So for example, pending running rebootings are EC2 machines which are like in kind of in good shape, and you typically can delete the rest. So if you want to find the ones that you want to delete, because there's a bunch of states, and it's not convenient to filter by the states which are bad. You want to filter by the shorter list, then you need to inverse the logic. So pending, running, and rebooting are okay, and you want to throw them away and just to have the machines which you can delete, for example, terminate. The one is interesting method. It looks in the list for one element which should match. If there are 0 or more matches, that's an exception. Because you have many situations when you know that there should be exactly one element like that. But if you do this assertion in the code, it's much more, let's say, maintainable code, and you don't need to comment, okay, there should be exactly one element like that. Couple of other examples. Find whether any element is matching the pattern, or all elements are matching the pattern, or how many elements are matching the pattern. But you got the idea. Okay, that's less interesting. Oh, actually, we are almost out of time. Is that right?
Yeah, you still have 15 minutes. That's fine.
Oh, 15 minutes. Okay, 15 minutes is good. Okay, so if you need to run things in parallel, which is another aspect where GS I think is quite convenient, you typically use pmap in NGS. Pmap tells in how many threads you should be running your stuff. So all these URLs, doesn't matter how many of them there are, they will be processed in 5 threads. That means that you have parallelism of 5, That's how it works. On the other hand, if you would do that in Python, that would be much more verbose. And the example on the right, which you see from Stack Overflow, it even does not include the parsing of JSON. So, well, I guess it's just much more verbose. Is order maintained? Yes, the order is maintained. The question was whether in parallel execution the order is maintained. Yes, and that's by intention. So let's say we have a list 1, 2, 3, and we do pmap and say 2 threads, and we just map it into the sequence $x. You see 1, 2, 3. We could do let's say a range, so you would see it's actually like more numbers. That's 1. It's a 0 to 10, not including 10. Yeah, so you see it's specific because it's map. The order is important. It's still a map, right? So you could do same thing if you remove the number and you remove the parallel from here, and that should behave the same. Okay, back. Who do we call? Yeah, okay. We were here. Okay, now the next example. You want to do something in a thread. I took example from Stack Overflow. I translated it to NGS on the left. Okay, and you can just see that it's shorter. By the way, this if name equals main, it just goes neatly into you declaring the main method. And that's exactly for that, because it's so common and you see it in Python all over. I thought, well, that's common. That gets its own, feature in the language. So if your script runs top to bottom. If it happens to be that your script defined the main method, it will be invoked. So that means that if you have small script, you don't need to define main method. You just write your code, top to bottom, and it's just executed. Anyhow, so what we have here, we have thread start here on the right, which we don't have in NGS or Ruby for that matter, because we thought, if you're creating a thread, you probably want to start it right away. That's not typical use case when you create a thread and you want to start it later. What else? Not much. It's actually pretty similar, except that you need to do a couple of imports in Python here. And NGS doesn't have a built-in slip, so it runs external command for that. Other than that, it's like quite similar, I would say. Working with files. Not particularly interesting until it gets into the interesting features which are on the bottom, where you can fetch the whole file and parse it in the same command, fetch, for example, or you can store structured data in the file with one command. You don't need 2 separate steps to like encode JSON and then store that into a file. How this store knows that it should be JSON? Guess what? The file is named .json, so here you go. Okay, what else? Maybe less interesting. You can get the lines from the file. You can run your own code on each line, which will later have some efficient implementation. Right now it doesn't. You can write lines into file with one command. Well, that's the regular stuff. Maybe files. That's more interesting. Okay, that's a concept. Okay, that you have a file which might or might not exist. And then you don't want all the commands which work with this file to fail, because you know it might not exist. You expect that. So for example, if you read from that file, you'll get null, not an exception. If you want lines of that file, that will be an empty array. If you call lines with callback, it just will never be called. So everybody knows, okay, there might be a file, there might not be a file, which is fine, because you told everybody that you know that it might not be present. Okay, TMP file, temporary file. What's let's say neat about this feature is that whenever you create temp file, it gets deleted automatically when the script exits. So you don't need to take care of that. Which is actually it records how this is implemented. There's a hook on exit, and whenever temp file is created, it gets yet additional hook callback and just deletes the file when it's called on exit. So a bunch of commands which are dealing with files, when given no arguments where to read or which file to work with, they just read from standard input. So that's how you can fetch JSON here. For example, you run EC2 describe instances, then you call NGS, you fetch reads all the JSON from the pipe, and well, top level over there is VPCs, and then you're looking for the one which is the default, and you want its VPC ID. So that's how you would. Actually, there's something shorter, but I'm not getting into that because, and just a brief description. In backtick syntax in NGS, when you call AWS EC2 commands, they are parsed a bit more. They're not parsed into JSON, in like simple JSON. They are parsed one level beyond that, so you would not need to do .vpcs on that, because the JSON which is returned, it's a dictionary which has exactly one key and one value. So in that case, if it's AWS command, you just get the value, and the value is typically an array. So you will not have .vpcs over here. But that's just a step aside. Exit codes. Another time when we get exit. Another time where we see that NGS takes care about exit codes. Now these are exit codes from NGS. So let's say you use NGS as part of your greater shell script, and let's say we are talking about the same service which returns status. So this thing equals that will evaluate into Boolean, and here Boolean true would return 0, and Boolean false would return 1. So that's why it's so easily and straightforwardly embedded in bash if, for example, because the exit code it was taken care of. By the way, you can if you can condition be set to control when it's deleted automatically. On 6 only deleted. Yeah, we'll get into the. Okay, there's a question. I'll get into that in a moment. Okay. Yeah. So if you define your own type, if you define the exit code method on your type, that's how you tell NGS how to convert your object into an exit code. So let's say, maybe it's not very clear. Let's say we define type T, and now we have, oh, switch to Hebrew. Okay. And now we are returning instance of type T. What would be the exit code? 0, because it doesn't know about this type. So it's okay. The guess was it's okay. But if you define exit code of X, which is of type T, and say it's 10, oh, that's a problem. Exit code, why it's not working? Because we are not returning T anymore. That's why it's not working. It's just left over here. Yeah, that's 10. But you can write your own custom code here, maybe check something inside the object and tell everybody whether it's okay or not, or whatever. Okay, anyhow, so the question was whether temp file, whether you can control if temp file is deleted. Let's say you had an error and now you don't want the temp file to be deleted. That's interesting. This is currently not supported, but if it's your use case, you are welcome to open an issue. And I think this should be supported. Maybe don't delete or something like that on the TMP file. Yeah, that's completely valid use case, and it should be in. Okay, exit. So since I noticed that, if you have exit somewhere in the middle of your program, that means something wrong happened. So the default exit code for exit is 1. If you want, you can override with something else, but typically that's because an error occurred. I want to skip about some slides here because they are less interesting. And we are almost out of time. Okay, so this switches is why NGS is integrated well into the command pipeline, because you can output your stuff in many formats, not many, but quite a few. Print lines will print the items of an array each on its own line. Print JSON will print, convert your expression into JSON, the result of your expression into JSON. Print JSON lines will convert each item of an array into JSON and print that. And print inspect is actually for humans. Okay, that's yeah. Oh, yeah, another interesting feature. PT, actually, I don't think it was mentioned. It's print table. So if your expression returns, let's say, array of objects, they will be printed in a table. This is actually integration, not really integration, but I'm using output from JC. JC is an interesting project in which whatever command you give, it parses the output and returns JSON instead of it. So if you had file, it is now parsed into JSON. So over pipe here, there's JSON, and NGS just prints it as a table. Just a couple of cool language features which are not associated with any particular use case. The command line arguments are parsed into the parameters, into the arguments of main. And the only other place where I have seen that happening is that's in Raku, formerly named Perl 6. Because it's just convenient. And if your script is small, you don't want to waste like 5 or 10 lines just to parse your argv into something that you need. So this, for example, is optional because it has a value. It's like in Python. Section. That's interesting one. That's how you just organize your code. It doesn't have any like deep semantic meaning. It just easier to organize the code because if you have these curly braces, and you can indent your code, and then when you look at the code, it's just more organized. Also, I found recently I found another use case for this syntax is that instead of leaving to do, you just leave a section with a name and it's empty, and that's how you know you need to write this. Yeah, customizing exit codes, we have seen that actually. Guards and exceptions, I mentioned that. That's how you should be feeling now. I hope. Let's see whether we have some, future command line interface, the shell. The shell is not ready, and that's because the shell itself should be in NGS. And NGS was the language because I started working on the shell, but it's just starting. Autonomous is not interesting. The pattern matching, that should be, I think it should be developed very much. It should be like big facility. Yeah, destructuring should go there. I think it should be something very big because I think it's very useful. Speed could be improved, but that's right now is not very important. Yeah, all the rest is not very interesting. So what, guys, I propose you do next? Okay, first of all, start running next generation shell. Some of you already did. If you didn't, that's a link. I think I can be copy link. Okay, I'll paste that. Yeah, join the Discord. Okay, I'll just paste it into chat for your convenience. Oh, this one didn't copy. Copy link. Sorry for the spam. What the? It doesn't copy, I think. Copy link. Yeah. No, it's not copying the link. How about this one? Copy link. No, it just the copy doesn't work anymore. Okay, so no links. Sorry, guys. Okay, so you are invited to join Discord. If you have a use case which fits neatly into the DevOps definition and it's not covered by NGS, oh, thank you, Fulvio. Open issue, like with this TMP file. This is completely valid use case where you had an error and now you don't want to delete the stamp file. You actually want maybe to log the name instead. Thanks for the links. And you are, of course, welcome to contribute by, actually, you can do many different things to contribute. Feedback, help, participate in language design. It's because language design is something that is very easy to get wrong. And the more eyeballs and more opinions you have, this is much better. Implementation, of course, and yeah, talk about NGS and, tell your friends, of course. Oh, we have bonus slides, but we don't have time for them. So I guess we should start the maybe questions if you have.
Yeah. Wow. That was amazing. On my end, I enjoyed. I have lots of questions, but first, there are a few questions in the chat, and maybe others wanted to ask something. So,
The questions that I have seen in the chat, I answered. If there are some which are not answered, you are like, please welcome, just
yeah,
either by voice or by chat, just ask.
if anyone from those who placed the questions in the chat feels that it didn't receive an answer, please ask again. Okay. Yeah, Ilya, we should provide you should organize the slides and people will get access to the slides and the video, of course.
Yeah, I just didn't have enough time. I wanted to do that. I wanted to provide the link during this meetup, but I just was not prepared enough. Can you share? Yes,
Yeah.
I will.
Okay.
Yeah, it's because I want to place it on some, not just share it from here. I want to place it on some good URL and share then. I think I just can probably on the meetup.com. I can just update, comment with the link.
We can discuss it later. There are lots of options to choose from. Uh, I was curious about the support you have for threads. Is there any limitation we should be aware of? I'm talking, do you have anything like the GIL we know from Python that we should be aware of?
Nope. Specifically, not, because I knew about this issue and I didn't want it to happen. So that means that you need to use logs when you need that. It's kind of manual. Well, there will be higher level facilities like this PMAP, and then you don't need to care that much. There will be there are already some facilities which are higher levels, and you don't need to care about logs. But yeah, there are no limitations. There is an issue where you can bomb yourself in PMAP. If you do not specify the number of threads, it will use the one thread per item that you have. So if you have pretty big array, maybe you want to specify the number of threads. Maybe I should place, built in some limit on that. Yeah.
So basically, the operation we count on the operation system to optimize and use the cores it has, or do you have any sort of control? For example, if you have a computer with 10 cores, at certain numbers, and do we have any way to control, to split the work between cores, or do we let the operation system do the optimization it knows and that's it?
Well, there is no explicit support for like pinning something to a particular core. I'm not sure how to do it. But if this limit the number of virtual cores, limit by number of virtual cores. So the suggestion is to limit the number of threads to virtual cores. Well, it depends on what these threads are doing. If they're doing like heavy CPU work, then this is correct. But let's say if they are reading from somewhere and can be blocked, then you can have much more of them. So it's not very straightforward. Default is number. Yeah, I know. Yeah, so many tools do that. Maybe as a default, it should be fine, but I don't know. It needs discussion. Yeah. So by the way, guys, so this discussion, for example, that can go into GitHub issues. Like, okay, here's the issue, the default limit of number of threads. Here's my opinion. What do you guys think? And then we can conclude something, and then it can be implemented after that.
May I ask something?
Sure.
When it comes to functional facilities, I mean, like filter, map, etc.,
Yep.
within the core language, what's available right now, apart from filter and map that we already seen?
Woohoo. Okay, a bunch is available. I'm not sure it's I have this on the slides. So filter map, is the usual suspects. The one they all get all the functions that you have seen, which are taking. Sorry, forgot the word now. Which are taking that are taking patterns. They can take. Well, I'm just tired. They can take predicates. Okay, so that's your support for functional programming. So on let's say you have filter, but on hash you also have the regular filter will take a callback with two parameters, one for key and one for value. But I see that in many cases you want to filter only on the value or only on the key, and hence there are filter key function and filter v function, and in the end you will get a hash filtered by either key or the value. Does it make sense?
Is there, for instance, a reduce function of sorts or something like that?
Yeah, there is reduce. Actually, it is there, but the use is not that. I don't use it that much. I don't know. Maybe it's me. There is reduce. There are actually two of them. One is taking the start element, and one which doesn't. Okay. Well, and the only example I have is actually sum. So I don't know. It's not that frequent. I don't know. It is there, just for completeness, but
it's common in, for instance, in JQ when you have to merge objects or something like that to use a reduce function, for instance, just talking
merge
about
objects.
the main
Okay.
question.
Okay. If you're merging objects, it's just a plus. Okay. In NGS, let's say we have A1, you can just merge it with B2. Done. Okay. That's one hash.
Another question about the types of data structures, or rather the serialization format. You've talked mostly about JSON, and then you've shown how to deal with the output of null separated lines from find, for instance.
Yeah.
Should one wish to employ a different format, for instance, one that is not readily defined, what should one do to should one actually write a parser for it, or is there some other way to actually define it?
Right now, you have exactly two ways to do that. One is find C library, which does that, and add this to the project. And another one is to do this kind of manually. Well, actually, since we're talking about shell, it's also appropriate to use external tool which does the parsing and converts it, say, to JSON. Well, it's slow anyway,
But basically, you're telling us that you can actually take advantage of C libraries to actually.
Well, it needs to be coded, yeah, but yes, the project is in C itself. So there is part of the project is in C, and whatever I could, that's implemented in the standard library. You can see it's 7K lines. It's even more a bit. Because I said, if one day I want to rewrite in Go, well, probably not Go, but let's say Rust. If one day I want to rewrite this, I want the C part to be like really small, as small as possible, actually. Therefore, you have the standard library, and you have there are like a couple of other files which like less frequently used, but functionality is in there. Yeah. So if you would like to add a C library. Yeah, you add it to the project, and it's CMake.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how JSON is implemented, by the way. Okay.
What about in interaction with code written in other programming languages? A part of the possibility that you give us to execute a separated program. Is there anything else that your NGS supports?
Okay, so what is supported now is running external processes. That's how I communicate with these guys. I'm not sure whether I opened an issue for that, but I was actually thinking this Node.js guys, they came up with something interesting, which you generate Node.js code, you generate code in other language, and then these guys communicate over standard input and standard output, where the Node.js runs kind of a server, and you can call methods. So it's like, it is running external process, but it's not doing it for every command that you're doing. You just keep it open and you can execute particular method call, like whichever method call you can do, but it doesn't need to rerun the program each time. So it also can have state on the other side. I was thinking about that. I'm not sure about that because it's a shell and it's running external programs is okay for now. If this becomes an issue, you're welcome to open. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we did a very interesting project about a year ago of integrating NGS into Juniper, in the Juniper notebooks. And there you actually have a possibility to match it on Juniper variable level. So you could write an NGS expression, take the result of that expression, which will be a variable, and consume it in Python. And that, initially appeared very powerful, but we didn't do much with it. It's just kind of, we did it for one thing, and then, we completed that thing and didn't continue with it because we don't use Juniper nowadays on a regular basis.
I just posted the link. Yeah, I just posted the link there for that.
That was, but that was a very powerful thing that, really seemed to promise a lot of power. So, which is, an interesting way to combine NGS with, for example, Python.
I've got another question. What about just saying, I'm working on integrating in a shell workflow some degree of interactivity. So there are quite a number of tools such as Universal Plumber or FZF, for instance. Does NGS support something on the interactive front? I mean, apart from,
unfortunately, sorry, not yet. It will be, I hope, somewhere with the shell itself. There's nothing interactive right now. It's a programming language. I think actually it differentiates NGS from alternative shells. I would say that NGS is programming language first, because alternative shells, I can see several projects and they all start with the UI. The UI is implemented in Go, Rust, whatever that is. They start with the interactive part, and they grow the language. And the language is typically very Bash-like with pipes. And I went another route. I think that's like more full-on programming language should be there. So that's, I think, the main difference in approaches.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a long answer of why we don't have interactive yet.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So I believe we should.
Can you show us an example, Ilya, about running against the AWS? Small thing. Just to get a feeling how it looks like.
Experiment. I don't know. I'm afraid to expose some sensitive information because the names of instances or whatnot. So
just count the amount of instances that you have running or something like that.
Yeah, everything is captured on video, even what we do now. So there will be
yeah, let's not.
Okay.
I can show a script I worked today on.
Okay.
That's at the dollar job. So we are comparing two data structures.
Of JSON and almost JSON.
Yeah, so the almost JSONs, we made JSONs out of that with sed, actually sed story. And then we are processing this with NGS. So in our case, we need to compare some bunch of stuff only by one field. So the lookup is an array. We take each element. Elements are objects. We take name of this, and we only compare the names. And that's how lookups are equal for
So
the
you can
purposes
override
of our
operators
comparison.
as well.
Yeah. So it's like in Python that all these operators are actually method calls, but just more straightforward because I don't rename them. Equals, it's just, it's the same name, the same as the operator itself, not like underscore equals or whatever that would be in Python. Same idea. I think just better implementation.
Question: does the support for AWS, for instance, in NGS, map directly, API to AWS API to NGS? I don't know, function name, etc. Or is there a bit of, I don't know, a composition of sort? For instance, there are just coming to mind, for instance, that you might have in AWS in the CLI, for instance, something like EC2 described instances, for instance, that may refer volumes by ID. And then you got a different command, which is describe volumes, that describes the actual volumes. But of course, they are not related to each other directly. And so my question would be, is there a just one-to-one mapping or something like that? Or is something a bit more complicated, complex?
Okay, so there are two things in NGS for AWS. One is the backtick parsing, which does a bit over the JSON. The second one is, I would say, experimental library, in which you cannot, like, say, walk through the objects of the .ami, for example. It will not do that. But here's example of how you can create like a minimal installation with an instance. Okay, so it's
semi-descriptive in a way.
Yeah, it's declarative, but per resource. It's running top to bottom, but if you have this converge here, it means that if resource is already there, it will not do anything. It's like if you say take something like Puppet and just run resource by resource.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, this is thing that you cannot do, like, in, say, in Terraform. If this instance is stopped, okay, it will run it. Okay, you just don't have support for this in Terraform. I think in CloudFormation either.
Yes, you need something like Ansible or some, some sort of state machine of some kind.
Or NGS, for that matter. Yeah, because you can here you describe how you find this machine, right? Typically that will be but tags, right? Here is by everything, right? But you can just say tags, okay? Define the tags. Tags is just a hash here, and convert state running, and you're done.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so the AWS library is like kind of experimental. I used it at work. It works. It's just they made the API so inconsistent, so I could not like generate or do some generic code. It's just impossible. They are fucking awful. There's almost no the number of dimensions on which APIs differ per service. That's amazing. Even working with tags, in EC2 you fetch the tags together with the instance. With load balancers, you need to do separate API call to gauge the tags. What the fuck is wrong with you people?
Yeah, it's a sedimentary walk. something that has been I don't know, I see something at my work as well. You got many people writing many different pieces, and consistency goes to hell.
Yeah, so on the other hand, I understand that the AWS teams were able to move quickly forward, but the end result, I mean, AWS probably don't care that much, because that's not why you will probably not use the cloud. Oh, that's my cat. Just. But the end result is it looks pretty bad.
Yeah, and let's not talk about abstracting at a multi-cloud level or something like that.
Oh no, let's not go there.
I just seen actually an article when there was a system engineer talking about how this level of automation and also of API, actually, it's the promise of abstracting complexity away is being a bit defeated, because there is so much, so many differences that abstracting things and
between
away
the
from
clouds?
the API. Yeah, and even within a certain environment, the capability of abstracting thing, you actually get a one-to-one mapping into a different language. May that be Terraform or something like that, but you need to actually know everything about what you're working with anyway.
Yeah.
So it's the decreasing complexity, it's not there basically. It's actually, I know personally, I write Ansible playbooks that just that sort of mystic combination of a data structure with the imperative functions, etc., is so complex that you're actually wondering why you're not actually writing in an actual computer programming language.
Yeah, that's yeah. Go ahead.
There's more time actually trying to work around the syntax than actually doing what you wish to do. So it's sort of a more than a force multiplier, a force, I don't know, divisor. I don't know how to express that.
Yeah, about that complexity. Yeah, Terraform doesn't hide this complexity unless you write your module. Maybe they have the modules for something, but typically the resources are of this particular service.
It's very brittle, because you change one thing and it goes.
Yeah. So about the Ansible and stuff like that. So you can see many domain-specific languages going the same route exactly. They start small, and they say, "Oh yeah, we only have this problem," and they grow over time. Programming language with a configuration language syntax, and it looks pretty bad. And it happened in Puppet. It is happening in Ansible. I don't know how the people when we
actually I saw a talk in FOSDEM, I think last year, in the declarative language, the sort of minimalistic languages dev room, where there were people working on gigs. The new distribution base basically uses a Lisp derived language for pretty much everything. Use a functional package management, etc. So they were commenting about this new, newfangled, revolutionary development in Terraform, which are loops basically. And they sort of were laughing, saying, okay, we've got that in Lisp. We had that for, I don't know, 40 years, 50 years. And so what's the point? Just use a programming language for that instead of actually, doing somersaults by trying to, fit into a declarative language, something which is not declarative at all. And
yeah, so the original promise was, you have like different people on the team. Let's make it, let's make some order. You will use div, it will look fine. And then, guys, you don't want to know which, Puppet modules I have seen, how they look, and so it's just worse. Also in Chef, the cookbooks, it can start fine, and then after that you see, oh yeah, we need out of this 20 on 5, and now yeah.
And there is a different approach from a software engineer point of view, from a software developer point of view. From a system engineer and a software engineer. A software engineer person looks at system and then says, okay, I'm going to translate what I do in a programming language using this nice different language, does thing but they usually don't know what it means to actually manage an infrastructure. So they expect everything to work just fine and never to actually touch anything manually, which in the real world doesn't exist. Then you got the system engineers, which most of the time, not say every time, but most of the time are not programmers. So they don't actually know much about programming languages, that are lost in this.
This is changing.
These languages, which should not be programming languages, but actually are sometimes more complicated than an actual programming language, and they make a mess of it, or they just copy and paste stuff that doesn't quite actually work or scale. So it's I don't know really if we are actually solving the complexity problem, or we are just making it worse in a way nowadays. Perhaps there will be some revolutionary technology which will help us, but I don't know actually if we actually should tell system engineer just you need have a developer background to do system engineering nowadays. But I think that's
definitely
much the case, because I don't know, I think the system administrators in the old-fashioned definition of the job, especially if you are managing cloud infrastructures or something of that degree of complexity, I don't know, the skills that 10 or 15 years ago were there for that sort of job description nowadays are not anymore. You need to actually have at least some kind of background in programming or in development to actually be able to deal with the complexity.
Yeah, also, I had this funny, it's not even a story, but it's a small thing. Not even sometimes the system administrators don't understand, the cloud. So for example, one company I said, I need the EC2 instance, and the guy says, wait, opens the list of stopped EC2 instances and says, yeah, which size you need? I'll start it for you. And I'm saying, that's not how you're supposed to manage the cloud. He says, yeah, but it's okay for now.
It's not a VPS.
Yeah, never mind. It was just interesting experience.
Yeah, but I guess what NGS tries to do, apart from trying to go beyond the paradigm of the three standards, standard input, standard output, standard error, plus text parsing, which is I guess the problem nowadays, because after all the shell is not thought out for, at least the shell or the paradigm around the shell is not thought out for structured data passing most of the time. That's why you use JQ, you use all those sort of crutches, which or you actually use, I don't know, Perl or Python or whatever to actually go around it. But that's, I guess, is a way to answer to an evolutionary problem, because of course,
the problems have changed. You have structured data now, and dealing with structured data in Bash is painful because it doesn't have it, and whatever you need to do, you do it with JQ typically, and it's an external program call, and it doesn't look convenient, not anywhere near even.
Yeah, you have multiple layers for nothing basically, because that's not what you need.
Yeah. By the way, it's interesting to see, that Bash over time got, for example, associative arrays. They were not there in the beginning. I think maybe the arrays, I'm not sure where they appeared, but since we have this behavior of splitting a string by spaces into multiple positions, I would assume that the array was not there from the beginning, and that's how they were doing array.
There is a problem, I guess, as well, which is related about the training of people. Recently, my company started training my colleagues on, when you are dealing with structured data, use format-aware tools. Don't use text-based data, text-based tools or line-based tools to deal with data structures. Because you can do a splitter CSV with cut or some, or awk or something like that.
And you shouldn't. Yeah.
Because you never know when it's going to fail, etc. But
it's
nowadays,
all the time.
That's, many people don't actually know the tools because they are actually coming up pretty quickly around on GitHub or places like that. Proper tools to deal with this sort of data is usually one of those, untold or untaught, I might say, things about, the profession. or for instance, how
Well,
to
I do see this issue addressed in if you take alternative shells, which are like pretty recent. They all work with structured data. It's all understood that this text parsing thing should end for the better life of everyone involved. And they do structured data, and some of them over pipes. Even PowerShell.
PowerShell,
but PowerShell has other issues. I think that the language itself is just a bad attempt, I would say.
Very portable, I guess, in a way, or other.
Well, I think it runs on Linux, but I wonder which parts exactly do run. Yeah, I think that the language, how the language behaves, and the syntax and all that, they took kind of the bad parts from Shell and Perl, and they stuck it into PowerShell for some reason, which is unclear. I did see that PowerShell is very actually powerful, and that is actually deserved to call it PowerShell, and you can do like pretty much anything, but it looks just horrible. That's my opinion.
That may be true.
Hey,
Okay.
I think we shall conclude the meetup. We shall send you an email, not an email, a message through the meetup platform with everything we promised. And that's it. And yeah, I enjoyed. I usually talk, and this was an opportunity to listen, and I enjoyed. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, thank you guys. You were wonderful.
Thank you as well.
Thanks.
Take care. Take care.
Thank you.
Take care.
Well, bye bye.
Bye bye.